All right. Well, welcome back. This is episode 15 of our Sabbath series, and we're actually taking a bit of a turn as we move into the last part of the analysis because today we're getting into Sunday and its role in Christian worship. And so excited to kind of make the turn. Hopefully, everything we've been talking about so far has been crystal clear. If not, I will make this suggestion. I would absolutely love to be able to connect with any of you as you've gone through this analysis. Go ahead and scan the code, reach out to me. Would love to connect if you have any questions, thoughts, comments, or concerns. So, without any other further ado, let's jump straight in to today's conversation about Sunday. So, as we go into the discussion, there are many covenant theologians, and that phrase spans a large range of individuals. But many of these covenant theologians will insist that Sunday has been replaced or has replaced the Sabbath, and that the Old Testament Sabbath laws now apply to it. Now, this claim, obviously, it has led to a widespread belief system about the origin, the significance of Sunday worship in Christian practice. And while I will say that Seventh day Adventists, which is kind of in this segment, while they differ from traditional covenant theologians, they also retain some oddly historical perspectives of Sunday and Sabbath. And we call that historical revisionism, where there's a little bit of repainting that goes on with regards to kind of what happened with the Sabbath and how it got changed. Now, a common misconception in this line of thinking is that Sunday worship only became widespread after Emperor Constantine's decree in, yes, you guessed it, AD 321, or you might have heard it referred to after the Council of Laodicea in AD 364. Now, I'm going to share with you, and this is a good place to just segment into this. If you haven't been following the blog articles that are going along with these particular videos, please do check it out, because all of the citations, all of the resources, all of the quotes, everything that are a part of this is found on the blog. All you have to do is go to the blog articles and you'll see the details of this. So there are a couple of articles that I would point you in connection to. So the first one, this is an extensive historical documentation on Sabbath and Sunday in the post-apostolic church. Now, this is by a scholar by the name of R.C. Bauckham. Now, there are a ton that I could point you into. I'm just going to share with you two. The second one is second century witnesses to the Sabbath and the Lord's Day debate by John English Lee. Now, both of these are articles. One is in the book that I have referenced multiple times in this series called From Sabbath to Lord's Day, a biblical, historical, and theological investigation. The second, which is the one by John English Lee, that is actually in a journal called The Churchman. And again, you can check that out. It's actually a journal for the Church of England and global Anglicanism. But you should be able to see a synopsis, kind of a historical documentation that demonstrates that Sunday worship, clearly from a historical standpoint, Sunday worship was already a well-established practice among churches outside of Israel by the early second century. It's clear evidence of this, okay? The evidence suggests that Sunday worship was a well-established practice by at least the early 2nd century. In fact, one article notes that when evidence becomes available in the 2nd century, when we see it pop up into history, Sunday worship appears as the universal church practice outside of Palestine, with no trace of controversy or dissent. So it's really, really interesting. This universality is best explained if Sunday worship was already the Christian custom before the Gentile mission, spreading throughout the expanding Gentile churches, the diaspora, okay, the going out. So the lack of any record of Christian accounts not worshiping on Sunday further supports this particular view. Now, I am going to share with you just a couple of things. There is an article, and again, the best way for you to get connected to this, I'm going to say it again, head over to thethinkingcup.com, because all of the articles that I can't read through all the articles, that would take a ton of time, but I've got them sourced for you. If you head over to check out the actual citations in here. And so the first citation is referenced by A.T. Lincoln in the book From Sabbath to Lord's Day, A Biblical and Theological Perspective. And that's going to be really this connection. The lack of any record of the Christian groups not worshiping on Sunday is going to support that. Now, by the early 2nd century, Sunday worship was already established as a universal practice, and we see that. Let me look at my notes here. We see that very clearly in all of these articles that I've mentioned. Okay, the evidence from the post-apostolic period, including references in documents like Acts of Peter, Acts of Paul, the Epistula Apostolorum, consistently indicates that Sunday was called the Lord's Day in all of these articles. Now, these are 2nd century, okay? Early Christian church articles. No, they're not canonical. But from at least the second half of the 2nd century, we see this to be the case, okay? Early post-apostolic references, while it isn't totally unambiguous, it strongly suggests that Sunday was definitely in view. And we find that from A.T. Lincoln's article. Again, all of this is referenced on my blog website in the article that's for today's session. Okay, the universality of the custom and the absence of any controversy over whether worship should it take place on Sunday or not. Okay, that does argue for its early origin. And the reason why this is important is because this should dismantle any kind of notion that prior to 321 AD or the Council of Laodicea in 364 AD, that, oh, this is when everything popped up. No, there's plenty of documented evidence that that is not the case. Okay. However, in those early centuries, while Sunday was observed as a day of worship, we see that very clearly documented. I want this to get very close to home, okay? It was not regarded as Sabbath. And that's one of the main arguments that I think a lot of Adventists like to kind of hitch their train to, is that, oh, yeah, no, Sunday, clearly Sunday isn't Sabbath. No one's arguing for that. Sunday has never been the Jewish Sabbath, okay? Later church councils ratified the existing practice and began applying Sabbath regulations to Sunday, which was a practice that developed over time. But initially, Sunday was simply a day of corporate worship. That's it. That's all it was. okay, in the historical documentation. It was not a mandated day of rest. Now, despite this very clear historical development, many still speak of a Christian Sabbath, or they call it Sunday Sabbath. That isn't accurate. It is no more accurate to refer to a Christian Sabbath than it would be to speak of a Jewish Sunday. That makes no sense. Okay, that would make it would be so out of context. All right. Now, a gentleman by the name of, and really we can't have this conversation inside of kind of the development without bringing in a reformed theologian. Okay. Charles Hodge, in his monumentous work, he has a work called Systematic Theology. He is going to strongly argue that all 10 commandments remain in effect, including the fourth commandment concerning the Sabbath. And I'm going to show you this in just a second. But okay, just hear me out. Okay, his argument relied solely on Old Testament principles while ignoring the clear seventh day emphasis of the Mosaic law. So here's what he, and I'm going to argue this is what he correctly, okay, here's what he correctly argues with regards to this discussion. He says this in the top paragraph. We are bound, therefore, to insist upon the maintenance of faithful execution of the laws enacted for the protection of the Christian Sabbath. Now, this to me is an inaccurate. I made a statement earlier. I'm going to correct myself. Okay. I said this was accurate. I apologize. This is an inaccurate assertion because it's only arguing from Old Testament principles while it's ignoring the clear seventh day emphasis of the Mosaic law. We don't have a Christian Sabbath. There is none. Okay. Now, you're going to see some other areas that this is going to pop up. I've mentioned before a term called dispensationalist. In fact, I have been wrongly accused of being a dispensationalist. It seems to be just a category that people get thrown in. If you're not a Seventh-day Adventist, oh, you must be a dispensationalist. No. So even some dispensationalists, okay, have mistakenly applied Sabbath principles to Sunday. I'm going to give you an example of this. This is taken out of the Merle Unger reference. This is in New Unger's Bible Dictionary in reference to the Sabbath. And here's what is stated. This is under the heading Contrast to the First Day of the Week. As the Sabbath commemorates God's creation rest, the first day speaks of Christ's resurrection. Well, I don't argue with that, okay? The seventh day marks God's creative rest. On the first day, Christ was unceasingly active. The seventh day commemorates a finished creation. The first day, a finished redemption. In the present dispensation of grace, Sunday perpetuates the truth that 1/7 of one's time belongs to God. In every other particular, there is contrast. Now, I understand the argument that's being made here. I get the 1/7, or a portion of you should be giving to God. But this is a wrong application of what we are under. The Sabbath is not transferred to Sunday. Now I'm going to give you another kind of mention here. And the only way I tried to find the actual unpublished letter, I could not find it. So I'm going to have to take Fruchtenbaum's word for it. But he references in a book called Israelology, the missing link in systematic theology. He's going to reference a few things here. Notice that those Messianic congregations that insist on a Friday night or a Saturday morning worship are wrong. if they make it a requirement, but if they merely make it optional, they have the total freedom to do so. Those who absolutely require Sunday worship are equally wrong because they have no biblical validity. If Grace Community Church, now that's the church that it's actually a church in Los Angeles. If they wish to use Acts 27 as the rule of thumb, then they will have to insist on a Saturday night worship, not a Sunday morning worship. Okay, the clear teaching of the New Testament is that in this dispensation of grace, you might not like the terminology there, it is not obligatory that a particular day be set aside, and there is freedom in the Lord in the matter. Therefore, let each congregation, individual congregation, make its own choice. Okay, so I just want to be very clear, okay, that if anyone contends that while the Sabbath in the Old Testament was a reward for obedience, Christians now live, okay, out their reward in Christ. That is what goes on. Sunday marks the beginning of that life, okay? They oftentimes people that look at it this way, they point to Acts 20 verse 7. They point to 1 Corinthians 16:2. And then they will also point to Revelation 1:10 as evidence that the early church universally observed Sunday as the new Sabbath. However, this argument assumes rather than proves that Sunday observance was mandatory and divinely ordained. So I want to be very clear as I exit out the beginning of our conversation of Sunday and how it fits in Christian worship. Friends, under the freedom that we have with Christ, there is no obligatory, mandatory day, whether it would be Friday or Saturday or Sunday or whatever day. You're missing the point. We rest in Christ Jesus. And because of that rest, we have the freedom to gather as Christ followers, to honor Jesus, to worship him. We have that freedom to do so in whatever day and in whatever method the individual congregation chooses to do so. Where we step over the boundary is when we begin to mandate specific days, that it is required. That then puts it into the line of it is now salvific, and that is out of bounds. That is unbiblical as we get into the conversation of Sunday and its role in the Christian's life.